This is Mr. Martin. This video is for Pre-Calculus Honors, and we are continuing to talk about section 9.7, graphs of polar equations. So in this video we're going to start talking about Rose curves, and a Rose curve is in the form r is equal to a sine n theta, or r is equal to a cosine n theta, and obviously a cannot equal 0. And n is going to be an integer that's greater than 1. Alright, so with Rose curves, if n is an even integer, it's going to have 2n petals. And then if n is an odd integer, it will just have n petals. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. Let's make some adjustments to our chart here. So this is going to have to be a sine, and then we're going to adjust these a bit. These are not correct for that. Alright, so let's take a look at some general equations here. So let's say we have r is equal to some generic value a and then sine of 2 theta. So since our n is even, we're going to have 2n petals, so we're going to have 4 petals, and if it's a sine, it's going to look something like this. So let's do our best to draw a nice Rose curve here. Alright, so that's not great. Let's try that again. Right, so a little bit better. So they should be evenly spaced and they should all be the same shape. Hopefully you get the idea. So again, n is 2, so we're going to have 4 petals, and notice how those petals are rotated for this, and we'll when we get to cosine, you'll see it's similar but a little bit different. Alright, so let's say we look at r is equal to a sine 3 theta. So now since n is odd, it's going to have 3 petals. So it's going to look something like this. And these petals should all be the same size, and they should be evenly spaced. And then we could continue on with 4. N equals 4, we would have 8 petals. N equals 5, we would have 5 petals. But the key here is that when n is even, you'll have twice as many petals, and when n is odd, you'll have the same number of petals. So moving on to what the cosine ones will look like. So this should be a cosine n theta. And again, we'll look at when n is equal to some generic value a, cosine 2 theta. So n is 2, so we're going to have 4 petals. And for this one, the 4 petals are going to look like this. Alright, again, they should all be evenly spaced and the same size. Each petal should be the same size. And you can see how these are rotated about pi over 4 from the other one. And let's look at r is equal to a cosine 3 theta. So again, it's going to look similar. We're just going to be rotated a little bit differently. So this one's going to look like this. And there's a cosine 3 theta. Alright, so those are our Rose curves. And moving on to the last type that we'll cover in this section, we've got lemniscates. So these are in the form r squared is equal to a squared sine 2 theta, or r squared is equal to a squared cosine 2 theta. And then again, a cannot be 0. So lemniscates containing sine are symmetric to the pole, and lemniscates containing cosine are going to be symmetric to the pole, the polar axis, and theta equals pi over 2. So let's take a look at what these will look like with sine. So if we have sine, it's going to look like this. So sort of like a figure 8 or two petaled rows. So you can see this is symmetric with respect to the pole. If I rotated this 180 degrees, it would line back up on itself. And then for a squared cosine 2 theta, it's going to look like this. Okay, so you can see it has all the different symmetries with that one. Now, if we're going to try and graph these on our calculator or on decimals, what we need to do is we just need to take the square root of both sides. And when you're graphing it, it really doesn't matter if you graph the positive square root or the negative square root, you're going to get the same graph. Alright, so that'll be the end of this video. Again, if you have questions, make sure you get those answered in class. And in the following videos, we're just going to look at graphing a few examples. And we're going to graph these without a calculator or without a graphing calculator at the very least. So if you have a regular calculator that doesn't do graphing, you might want to have that handy. Otherwise, for the next assessment on these, we're going to do these without graphing calculators. All right, we'll see you in the next video.